Hello and welcome back to my channel. Jacob here, and today we'll be talking about Sharpe's Triumph, which is the second book in the Richard Sharpe series. If you've seen the first video and you've read the first book since then, I'm going to give a couple spoilers here because the book starts off with the now promoted Sergeant Sharpe, no longer Private Sharpe. He is now Sergeant Sharpe, transporting 80,000 rounds of ammunition with his men under his command when they are attacked by a Major Dodds. Or I'm sorry, he's not Major Dodds yet, but he does become Major Dodds because we find out that this Dodds has basically betrayed the East India Trading Company and is working for the Maratha Confederacy, which have basically fallen back to one region that they control, and from there are recruiting European commanders to wage war against the British forces. Now, all by himself and the lone survivor of the attack, we have Sergeant Sharpe once again falling under the command of Major McCandless and General Wesley to basically go on another mission behind enemy lines with McCandless, and shenanigans basically is what's gonna happen. And of course, if you followed my comments in the first video, you'll know that there's also going to be a love interest at play because every book has a love interest for Richard Sharpe, which honestly doesn't always make sense, but it's kind of fun nonetheless. Sometimes it's a bit annoying, especially when you just want to see a specific enemy or a specific battle just kind of happen. But that's neither here nor there. And of course it wouldn't be a Richard Sharpe novel if there wasn't a subplot where some enemy who has it out for Richard Sharpe is planning some sort of either a revenge plot or some sort of murder plot against him. And that's exactly what we have, because Obadiah Hawkswell does not like the fact that Sharpe is A, alive, and B, has been promoted and is plotting against him. And to do that, he's got papers drawn up that Sharpe hit a commanding officer. And not only that, but he knows, or at least thinks he knows, that Sharpe has a large sum of money, or not really money, but rubies and gold and stuff that he stole from the Tipu when he was basically in the fall of that city, which is correct, and wants to use the arrest of Sharpe to be able to search his belongings and take it for himself. And I'll be honest, in the entire Sharpe series, at least I haven't finished it yet, I am book 12 now, I think Obadiah Hawkswell is still probably the best nemesis so far that I think that Richard Sharpe has. Most of the others that he has so far, at least along the series that I've read to this point, or to that point, they're usually they're usually become officers and men of quote-unquote good breeding, and they tend not to last more than a single book, whereas Obadiah Hawkswell, you know, we see him basically through the whole campaign in India, and he is honestly one of the most hated book villains I think I've ever read. I don't think I've ever read, at least not in a long series, a villain I've ever hated as much as I hated Obadiah Hawkswell, because I mean, book one I wanted him to die. You know what I mean? He's just awful. And that's exactly what you want in a villain, and I think Obadiah Hawkswell is definitely a good villain. I mean, you know, he's syphilitic, so his mind isn't right. He's clearly got some sort of narcissism where he thinks he should be rewarded over basically everyone else, but at the same time is super defensive of basically the class structure, but only as long as the officers treat him with the respect he thinks he's. It's all very confusing. And I think that's what makes him kind of an interesting character to read about, if not an infuriating one, just because of how unhinged he actually is. And I think it's kind of fun, too, when you read about, especially historical fiction, you realize, like, how far along someone that unhinged could probably get, just because, I mean, look at all the people he murdered. I mean, especially during a war in those days, it's not like they had forensics. They couldn't figure out who did it unless someone saw it. And yeah, I mean, I basically spent this whole book wanting something bad to happen to Obadiah Hawkswell, and sadly, him and Richard Sharpe don't have a blowout in this book, so that is also a minor spoiler, no matter how much I wanted them to. This book is, for the most part, concerned with Richard and McCandless hunting down Dodds and the other guy whose name I cannot pronounce correctly, who leads the European regiments for the Madara. Overall, I really like this book. There are a couple big battles that Richard Sharpe takes part in, and once again, I think Bernard Cornwell does a really good job of making all of these battles very interesting. And one thing that I will note in these books, and I don't know how do I phrase this, I don't know if it's because he wrote some of these books after some of the books that I'm reading now, but it definitely seems like there is a lot more hand-to-hand combat in the Indian campaign than the French campaign, which I'm reading now, where they're basically get to the point where they're fighting against Napoleon. And I thought that was kind of interesting, and I kind of wonder if that's because they wanted to make the combat seem a lot more like quicker and more interesting, or if that was kind of a terrain choice. Either way, I really liked it. I like the idea of more hand-to-hand combat, and it makes sense because they do point out that a lot of the tactics used by the Madaras and the Sepoys focus on like charges, which then go into hand-to-hand combat with swords and stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting. Whereas I guess in the European campaigns that happen in the later books, it is basically everyone standing in a line and shooting at each other, and that's interesting too. But I guess I'll note this in later books, but I can point it out now, I guess, too, and I'll bring that back up, is the fact that one thing I tend to not like in that is, especially when you get to know more about the different people in the unit, and they are basically focal points throughout the different books and the campaigns, and you just kind of get, after they've all stood in a line and shot each other, you get a, oh yeah, and after the battle we found out this person, and that person died, so you won't see their names anymore. That's kind of a letdown, but I don't know. I guess it makes sense too at the time, because if you were all standing in a line and shooting, you wouldn't know who died in your regiment until after that ended. But yeah, I don't want to spoil this book. Basically, I did enjoy this book a lot. I think even so far to where I'm at, like I said, book 11 or 12, I think the Indian campaign was by far maybe the most exciting in some aspect, especially like at least in the battles, which makes sense because it definitely seems like the soldiers were giving a lot more leeway during these campaigns to be a little more inventive than they were during the European campaigns, where it really does just kind of seem like they all march, shoot, march, and then there are some small regimented skirmishes, but I'll get into that later. I mean, it was also a different campaign, and there was a lot more going on. And it could also be because there are big time gaps between some of the books. Not so much as in like the years the books take place, but actually the years the books were written. Because Bernard Cornwell did not write the Sharpe series in chronological order, which is a bit confusing. I think they did a really good job though of when they did write, you know, prequels and stuff like that later on. I think they did a really good job of making it flow. I mean, some stuff is a little clunky, but for the most part, it does flow, I think, pretty well. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Right now, I love this book. I think, like I said, I think the trilogy that focuses on the Indian campaign are probably my 3 favorite Richard Sharpe books right now, and I will talk about Sharpe's Fortress in a later video because that is my all-time favorite Sharpe book so far. Once again, I am not finished with the series. I am not fully caught up, but I am getting there. If you like the Richard Sharpe series and you liked this book, please let me know below. Also, feel free to comment what your favorite campaign was that Sharpe has taken part in during the book series. Though if you are ahead of me in the book series, please do not drop any spoilers, as I am trying to finish the series as quickly as possible. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you plan on reading Richard Sharpe and want to follow me for more basically videos about Richard Sharpe, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.